Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second part of our GNSS or GPS sessions. Just want to check that you guys can all hear me all right. So someone just wants to type, "Hi, I can hear you," in the chat window. That'd be great. Fantastic. Thanks, Julian and Matt. Excellent. So hopefully a lot better than last week. I've got a different microphone, which is working a lot better. You're all seeing the slideshow that's cheerfully rolling on through. So I keep admitting everyone into the session. We will share the links that are up on the introductory page that you're seeing at the moment on the screen at the end as well, so you'll be able to get those links. Additionally, they're on the Moodle, and also we'll put them on our Facebook page. So thank you all for having your microphones turned off. I do feel like I'm kind of talking at nothing at the moment, but that's okay. We'll be starting up in just a couple more minutes, just while we keep letting people trickle in. But to thank you all for coming back for the second part. We're very pleased with how session 1 went last week. Matt did a great job under interesting circumstances, trying to teach all this theory, essentially talking to a microphone. But we think we got some pretty good feedback, so we're fairly happy with that. That session is recorded, and it's online. Also, there's a link to it on our Moodle and also on the Facebook page, and it's on our YouTube channel. Just a couple more minutes while a few more people trickle in. All right, so we're just about ready to start now. It's pretty close to smack on 6 o'clock, and we've got a bit of a timeline we need to run through tonight. First of all, I'd just like to a little bit of a reminder. I know you guys are already doing it, but just be aware. Please make sure your microphones are muted. Gary and Matt have a lot to get through. It's going to be quite an interesting night. It's very practical tonight, with going through both the Garmin 430 and the Garmin 296. And how they work. Gary's going to start off going through a bit of a tutorial introduction to the Garmin 430 and the Garmin 400 and what it's capable of. And Matt will finish off going through the Garmin 296. The reason we've done it in that particular order is because we've got a simulator for the Garmin 430, which allows us to show you pretty much exactly what we're doing with the controls. And then later on, when Matt goes through the Garmin 296, we don't have a simulator for that. One doesn't exist, but you'll already have the principles from the 430, which will help you to understand what happens with how the 296 works. So I'm hoping Gary's just about ready to get started. Gary, you almost ready?
All good.
Yeah, excellent. So I'm going to shut down the slideshow now, and we're going to hand over to Gary, who's going to start up the emulator. So your screen's going to go a little bit weird for a moment. I do apologize. And any minute now, Gary will get going with the screen share for the Garmin Emulator and get you guys all up and running with how the 430 works.
G'day everyone, thanks for the intro, Carl. Can everyone, or can at least Carl, see the 430 screen that I have shared?
Yep, it's all good here, Gary.
Okay, no worries. Sounds good. So I guess most of you at home have been able to download this. So it's a 400, 500 series trainer, covers essentially the 430, which is the common industry standard GPS for up to IFR operations. We have them in most of our charter aircraft, and in one of the Archers. We also have the Garmin 400 in the other Archer. The only difference really being the 430 has both COM and nav functions. So a radio within the GPS, whereas the 400 is purely without radio. So anyway, just onto the trainer here. So I'll give you a guided tour, effectively, of how this works in terms of the different buttons, the features, how the dials work, and of course how practically to be able to use it in flight is probably what most of you are most interested in. All right, so right from the start then is how to switch it on. So generally in an aircraft there may be an avionics master or radio master switch, which may then power everything up to the settings that were as last set. If not, then you may have to power up individually each item. So I assume everyone can see the mouse on the screen here as well. So the power on button serves also as volume for the radio. So pressing on here, you can see it's starting up with the initialization screen, going through a self-test, going through details of database updates and validity of data in terms of dates. So that's one of the most important things to check, is that the date is current, or at least reasonably current. In this case, we've got one just from a few months ago, a couple of months ago. But essentially, the software cards are updated on a almost monthly cycle. So you should see that the dates here basically have a future date for the data to be current, and it's going to be within a month or so in future. If not, then that data is not current and needs, the software card needs to be updated. All right, so a basic guided tour of the system itself and the different features. So, okay, so we have a prompt here questioning OK, question mark. So how to skip through any question mark that's shown in this lower right-hand corner is simply via this enter button here. So clearly quite a few buttons on it. Not that complicated though, since it's fairly old technology. But being familiar with how to use it certainly reduces the workload in flight. So anyway, clicking through the screens. So the first time we press enter, it gives a self-test panel here. So it's just checking that all of the functions are working correctly. So the CDI, course deviation indicator, should be showing half left. So that's ensuring anything from the Garmin instrument is feeding through to the instruments within the aircraft. So you may see here, the CDI bar here is showing half left. The vertical CDI is showing half up, and there's no flags showing, so they're out of view. The OBS, you can see that the OBS numbers here are changing if I rotate this dial here, so everything's working correctly. So it's possible to set how much fuel you've got on board and a fuel flow, and then you can use the 430 also to give you prompts of how much fuel is remaining, when to change tanks, etc. Particularly private owners set up the aircraft like that, and the Garmin, quite a useful feature. Right. You can also set up checklists as well for an individual aircraft. which is a very useful function as well. Something that many operators do use. All right, so clicking through the screens again, there's an overview then. It flashed over there quite quickly, but it shows how many satellites are actually being tracked at a given time. All right, so onto the main functions of this Garmin 430 or 400 series. Very basically, you can think of the different features as chapters. So at the moment, we happen to be in the nav chapter, and then individually across here, you can see there's a number of different boxes. At the moment, it's the white. There's a white mark in the second box from the left. So you can think of these as the individual pages within the nav chapter of a book, as an analogy. And you can simply just click through by rotating from the large dial here. You can rotate through those chapters. So we've got nav, waypoint, auxiliary information, and nearest. So it's using the large dial on the outside to change effectively chapters, and then the small one on the inside to change through the pages within a chapter, like so. So just a bit more of an overview. So we talked about how to switch it on and the volume, also the squelch there. That's for the COM side of things, which is shown in this window here. So there's the primary frequency, which is in use at any stage. And then below here is the secondary or standby frequency. There's a toggle button here. Very simply press it and it will change the standby to the active. There's the same for VOR or localizer frequencies here, nav frequencies. Again, a toggle button there, and also a volume with the squelch. So in terms of how you actually change the frequencies, so the large dial on the outside of the dial just here at the bottom, you can see the large dial on the outside changes the large numbers, the whole numbers of VHF frequency, megahertz, and the small one on the inside here changes the decimals in increments, like so. So for example, if we wanted to set a local Melbourne Centre frequency, we can change the whole numbers of digits there, and then the decimals on the inside. A little bit easier to use in the actual aircraft, where you can rotate it rather than on the simulator here. You have to click through individually each time. If you then want to change from COM frequencies, and now you want to change the VOR or localizer nav frequency, you push the button here, and it will flick over them from COM to nav. And then via same principle, you can edit the particular frequency that you might want, and then flip it over to become the active one. If you want to then transfer back to COM, push again, and it's changed now from nav to COM. All right. Okay, so that's the basis of the left-hand side. The data cards for terrain or aviation data are here, and they're updated via, it can be updated via a PC on that virtually monthly cycle. I believe there's 13 cycles in a year. Over on the other side, if we if we go over to, first of all, we'll set the position. So as you're following along at home, if you go to the top of the simulator itself and go into options, you can click on initialize position and you can set the GPS simulator up to where you want it to start from. So for example, in terms of setting Lilydale, so in this case, I'll just push and hold clear just to show how I actually do that again. So initialize position, and then if you click on the dial that's on the lower right hand side and the small dial, that will then bring up the ability to input an airport code, 4 letters starting from Y in terms of Australian airports, at least anyway. To then move over to the next character, we then click on, if we're in the aircraft, we use the outside dial to move over to the next field. In this case, you can just click on the outside where that arrow is, where my mouse is at the moment. So clicking over, and then alphabetical, so L clearly comes before M, so we're going to need to scroll anti-clockwise in this case. So like so. If we then want to go across one more field, again, click on the outside. Click on the outside, click over. We want to set it up at Lilydale. Quite often it will predict the 4th character, as you can see there. So to accept that, you can just press enter, and then that sets the simulator up at Lilydale itself. Okay, so if we go to the map screen, so a function here in terms of range, and it's not always particularly obvious, are you changing the scale to a larger scale or smaller scale? The way I teach is, imagine you want to see a larger view on the screen itself. Imagine you want to raise the elevation of the aircraft, like you want it to go upwards, and you'll see there that it changes the scale. It's shown now 10 nautical miles, whereas previously it was 5. And you can just zoom out like so. If you want a smaller scale, imagine that you want the aircraft at lower level, so you press the down arrow effectively for a small scale. Okay, so that's how that range works. There's buttons here, direct to, so you can specify, I want to tell the GPS I want to go from my current position to anywhere else via that button there. So as soon as you press that, it brings up a screen where you can then start entering a further position, as we did with initializing the position. So it would just be a case then of entering where it is you want to go. So for example, one click on the outer small dial. So in the aircraft, you just twist the small dial to the right or clockwise, and then select where you want to go through the same process. Now using the inside larger dial, rotate it around, and then dial in the identifier of the particular airport you want it to go to, for example, Moorabbin, and then you just press enter, and then enter again to activate. And now it's going to give you a direct to, or from your current position, direct to Moorabbin in this case. So that's how that direct to function works. There's also easier ways to do that, which I'll show you a bit later as well. Menu at any point, it's ways that you can change the view, setup of the map, for example. Do you want track up, for example, or possibly north up? Clearly it's personal preference, but if you want to do that, map setup there, press enter. And then if you want to scroll through these items, just use the inside dial here. And for example, if you want track up rather than north up, you can just rotate that around like that to give track up. If at any point you want to get out of where you are, you can push and hold clear. If you do that for 2 seconds or so, then it will take you out to the what we call the default nav screen, which is, you can probably just about read that small writing there that says default nav. So push and hold clear wherever you are, whatever you're doing in whichever window, it's going to always bring you back to this default nav tracking screen, which is particularly useful. Yeah, so then a few buttons here at the bottom here, which we'll go on to talk about in detail. Any questions so far?
No, Gary, no one's popped up with anything, but I'm curious to know what the message is.
Yes, that was the explanation of the buttons. So yeah, the message in this case, it's popping up a message to tell you to do something. In this case, we need to set the course to 205, which is the magnetic track between Lilydale and Moorabbin. In which case we could set the course bar, twist it around 205. Do not use for navigation. I think that's just some kind of disclaimer from the software producer that this is clearly not to be used for navigation in any shape or form. It's purely a simulator. The rest of the buttons I'm going to explain later. What I'm going to do now is a further demonstration of that push and hold clear. So holding onto that brings us back to that default nav screen. So what I'm going to do now is run through the pages effectively of that nav chapter. So how we're doing that is using the outside small dial on the lower right hand side. So twisting that around onto the next page that most people would be familiar with would be the map page. So actually just back to that default nav screen for a start. It's very useful in terms of what it shows. So it will show you according to how you set it up, and you can change all of these fields here to set it up for your own purposes in terms of what you want to see on this screen. The way you do that is if you press menu, it brings up this this menu here, change fields. So you can enter that, and then effectively you see the cursor flashing on distance there. If you want to change any of those fields, then you just click on or you twist on the small dial, and you can you could edit that distance to have any of these items here according to what it is that you want to display. If you want to go back out of this, a short click on clear will bring you back to this screen. You can just scroll through any of those 6 fields as required to edit them as necessary. Once you're done, if you're happy with that, push and hold clear. That's going to take you out of that editing function, and then you've got your 6 chosen criteria. So what does it show up here? Well, it shows the distance either side of a track. So in this case, the track itself is indicated by the line. The magnetic track is indicated by the line itself here, and the aircraft is shown by the triangle, which you could think of as the spinner of the aeroplane. So when you're perfectly on track, the line and the spinner, or the triangle, are both in the, so that's just perfectly on track. In order to be able to maintain that, we want the track that we're currently achieving to match the desired track. Right. So a few other things. So at the moment we're in terminal mode of the GPS. There's various modes in terms of what is the accuracy or what is the scale shown either side of track here. In terms of GPS mode and VOR or localizer mode, it's a case of pressing the CDI button here, the course deviation indicator button. That will change then the feed from either GPS feed from to then VOR or localizer feed from the VOR frequency that's selected. OBS, if you select that one, it allows you then to, and it's easiest to see on the map screen, which is this one. You can basically rotate around the, and I'll just change the scale of that. So I'll just zoom out slightly, maybe not that much. It basically fixes the point on the next waypoint that's coming up, which you can then twist around the course bar, and it will show a track, a given track of a particular magnetic direction through that waypoint. So that's the OBS function message we've spoken about before. Flight plan we'll come on to. I'm still working the way through the nav chapter. So if we scroll through the pages of that nav chapter using the small dial here, so map screen as discussed. The next page is terrain. So at the moment, the simulator is on the ground at Lodell, or even
Gary,
possibly even below sea level.
Gary, just want to briefly ask a question.
Yeah.
Alex has asked what OBS stands for.
So Omni Bearing Selector.
Okay, and what does it actually mean?
So, good question. So if we go back to the map page, so basically if it's in OBS mode and we're selecting a bearing via the course bar, we're effectively selecting a bearing through that waypoint, which can be omni bearing because it's any bearing 360 degrees around in total. If you click and hold the clear button, you'll see the bearing that's currently selected based on the number on the default nav screen.
What sort of things would you use that for, Gary?
The most useful, or one of the most useful ways, it's used a lot in instrument flying. A very practical way of using it, which I could show here, is a feature. So we get it. We'll set it back up as Lodell as an example.
I've heard it sometimes described as a little bit like a virtual VOR. Is that a good description?
Yeah, it is a good description. And another quite powerful use for it is you can set it up so it will provide a line through an aerodrome reference point, which you could set up in line with the magnetic track of a runway, for example. So then it gives an extended center line which you can intercept if you're inbound to an airport. So I can demonstrate that. Just require a couple of clicks to make that happen. Quite a bit more fiddly actually on the simulator than it is in the aircraft. Glad to know. Right, okay. So now we've got it set up on, just change the scale slightly. Okay. So now if we press OBS and twist this around until we have the magnetic track of the runway. So 357 is the magnetic track. 177, 357 is the magnetic track of the runway at Lilydale. It will then put a line straight through the aerodrome reference point, which happens to be the primary windsock, in line with the runway. So if we go back to the default nav screen now, and if you set it up as 357 on here, then you would have an extended center line of the runway to be able to intercept and track. So quite powerful. Any questions about that, or did that answer the question? Okay, so
what the OBS mode does. Thank you, Gary.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, so map screen terrain now. So at the moment it's set for 0 feet mean sea level, so clearly would be below sea level at Lilydale at the moment. In terms of the simulator itself, you can dial up the altitude using the button here. So this wouldn't, not necessarily normally in an aircraft, it is going to look quite different to this depending on how the aircraft's set up. But this is just for the purposes of the simulator. So here it demonstrates quite nicely the terrain. So basically anything that is red means that you are it's within 100 feet below your position. If it's yellow, it's between 100 and 1,000 feet. And if it's black, it means you're at least 1,000 feet above it. So if we dial up the altitude here to say 1,500 feet, the areas that are shown in black here were at least 1,000 feet above the ground in those areas. The yellow areas are between 100 feet and 1,000 feet below it. So that terrain page is particularly useful as well for an indication of the hills close by. Okay, so other pages of that nav chapter. Information here about the frequencies, local CTF, center frequencies. A compass here and coordinates. And these happen to be the satellites we're tracking and signal strands, and then some technical details on those satellites themselves. Over to the last page is vertical navigation, which is quite useful, particularly inbound to a particular airport. You know, when do you start descending? It's useful to have an idea of at what point you should start descending, so that you don't potentially arrive too high too fast, and therefore descending too late with too high a rate of descent. So the way this is driven, if you push the cursor here, you can nominate what altitude you want to be at before a particular waypoint. So at this point here, I think it's worth talking about the flight plan, and then I'll come back to how you can then use this vertical navigation profile. So one of the buttons that we've not been in yet, or used at least, is the flight plan button here. So if we click on that one, we can then enter a flight plan in terms of waypoints. So the way we do that, push the cursor, same then logic as to how to put waypoints in there by twisting the small dial and then the outside dial to move across. The GPS doesn't necessarily know where it's starting, so you have to tell it where the initial waypoint. So in this case, we'll use Lily down. So to enter, hit enter. Then dial in the waypoints as you need them. You can either go forwards through the alphabet and numbers, or backwards. So depending on where you are, it might be quicker to go backwards than forwards. So if we've just put in a very simple flight plan here, Lilydale via Academy, if it's in this database. Looks reasonable. And then Moorabbin. So a brief flight plan there. So then if you wanted to see the plan itself on a map, you could just push and hold clear and then move over to the map screen and just take it out of that mode. Clear that. So in terms of how do we activate a particular leg, so if we go onto menu, push the cursor. So if we want to activate the leg between, say, Lilydale and Academy, just highlight the particular place that you want to go to, press menu, and then press enter. Will activate that Lilydale to Academy leg. And if you want to see the plan on screen, click one over, change the view slightly, and you'll see now we've got Lilydale via Academy into Moorabbin here. Back to that default nav screen. Okay, so as I was talking about the vertical navigation, so it's scrolled all the way to the right clockwise on that nav page, or nav chapter. So that's vertical navigation. Push cursor here, so you can tell it what altitude you want to be at before or after a given waypoint. So clearly a flight from Lilydale to Moorabbin, it's quite easy to control the vertical navigation. But if it's a longer flight at higher altitude, it's quite useful. So you can nominate at what point you want to be at a certain altitude before your destination. So in this case, let's say, just as an example, If you want to be at 1,000 feet, so effectively circuit height for Moorabbin at 3 miles before you get to Moorabbin, put 3 miles in here. Into that before. And if we go to the small dial here, it will come up with all of the waypoints in your particular plan. You can then simply scroll down to the waypoint you want, click on enter. You can tell it what is your required vertical rate of descent. Standard rate of descent, for example, 500 feet per minute, and it will tell you what is your vertical speed required from right now to achieve 1,000 feet by 3 miles before the waypoint that you selected. Seems to have got lower down than that. Change that to Moorabbin. Bit interesting. In the aeroplane, it definitely would allow you to enter.
Hey, Gary, the aircraft's currently not moving.
Okay.
Getting a number.
We'll give it a little bit
of forward. There we go.
Yeah, for some reason though, it wasn't actually allowing me to select Moorabbin in there. I'll try it again. And then I'll try enter. Certainly in the aircraft this would work. It would then give before Moorabbin as the waypoint. For some reason the simulator doesn't seem to be cooperating. But, push and hold to clear takes us back to that default nav screen. Okay, so that's quite a bit of time taken up just talking about nav. Waypoints. So similar deal here. Waypoint chapter. We can dial through, then it's given us information about each particular waypoint. Log of information. If we then go on to the next one, so that's auxiliary. So we can look at fuel planning, trip planning. We can calculate density, altitudes, true air speeds, get the GPS to tell us what particular wind we're experiencing, is it a headwind, tailwind, etc. And what's the direction and strength of the wind.
So Gary, just with that stuff there under the aux menu, I found the
race checklist
is particularly useful. Could you maybe show us a little bit about the flight timer?
Flight timer, yep, sure.
Very useful feature.
So to go onto any of these, we just push and hold or push the cursor, which is effectively on the end of the dial, and then scroll down to flight timer, enter that. So the GPS will tell you what time you got airborne. You can also set timers as a reminder for fuel. It tells you how long the unit's been active, 33 minutes in this case since we powered up, and also the UTC time. So quite powerful. Just go back one there. And back one again. And just go into the aux. One thing that's quite useful, particularly if anyone's night flying, is the display and how to change the brightness. So on that aux chapter, if you scroll the page around to display, and click enter, it can be set on auto, or you can manually change the brightness. So if you do one turn on the small dial and select manual there, press enter, you can then dial down the brightness by twisting this. It seems that the simulator doesn't actually allow you to do that, but in the aircraft you'll see then with turning it dial down, and you need to dial it down into the order of hundreds, several hundred, to be a good brightness for night flying, i.e. not too bright. Anyway, so clear out of that. So waypoint box. Another particularly useful function is the nearest function. So it's got nearest airports. If you use the small dial again, nearest intersections or waypoints, nearest NDVs, VORs, user waypoints, etc. So very useful. One of the most useful functions here being nearest airports. So according to wherever you are, if you at any point, I'll just come out of it to show how I went into it again. But if you turn the inside dial, default nav, back to the beginning, if at any point you twist the outside dial all the way around clockwise, it will take you to nearest. If you then want to go to a particular airport within that selection, scroll down to your choice of airports. It's got them in order of nearest first. So let's say we wanted to go to Tullamarine, just scroll it down to Tullamarine. If you want to go directly there, we can just press direct to, enter, and that's now going to give us tracking information direct to Tullamarine. So very useful. Right, so that's a fairly brief overview. There's quite a lot involved. It's a very powerful system to be used, and a lot of the functionality is very similar to the Garmin 296, which is in our Jabiru aircraft and some of the Warriors. So unless there's any questions at this point on the front after the Zoom call, then maybe this is a convenient point at which to go on to the 296.
I think we've got through most of the questions we needed to on this one, Gary. Just a reminder to everyone that you can download this simulator. The stuff down the bottom half of it is the flight simulator part, and the part at the top is a bit that obviously emulates the Garmin. You won't see in every aircraft the same stuff that you can see at the bottom here, the little fake autopilot and the little sort of stuff you can use to set up to fly. But that's just allowing the GPS to move so that you can emulate it a bit. We do strongly encourage you all to get this particular simulator and have a play with it. It is really good. And Rob Packer's just asked if the 400 is a 430 without comms, and he's absolutely right. Yes, it is. It's exactly the same piece of kit. So if you're flying around in DDM, it doesn't have the comms on it. If you're flying in RCR, it does. Erica and Erica and Tom have just asked, I think they've downloaded the 400. If you go up to the options selector on the simulator, you can actually change which simulator it is, and you can change it over to be any one of those emulators. So the default's the 400. We don't want that, we want comms as well. So you normally go for the GNS 430, or if you're a bit fancy, you can go to the GNS 500, which has a bigger screen. It is otherwise basically the same unit. The instructions for this are all available. We'll put the PDFs, links to the PDFs are on the Moodle, and we'll make them available here through the chat as well. Thank you very much, Gary. We'll hand over to Matt now, who's going to take us all through the 296. But just very briefly, Adelia has asked on the approach, how many dots on an approach is half scale? That's a good question. I don't know the answer. Gary?
On the default nav screen here.
I think that's Delia's question. I'm not 100% sure, but she wants to know how many dots on an approach is half scale.
So like when we see...
So I'm going to have to guess.
Yeah, so a half scale on the CDI, that the bar would be shown here.
That's probably really a question that's
Yeah.
that's relevant to IFR training more so than a bit of an overview of the GPS. All right, thank you, Gary. We'll take a couple of minutes just to get stuff sorted out while I get the slides ready for Gary. Sorry, for Matt. So I'm just going to hand over to Matt now, who's going to talk a little bit, and I'll get the stuff set up for sharing the other side. So Gary, if you want to just shut down your share, I'll try and get you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks,
No
Gary.
worries. Thanks, Scott. Over to Matt.
Good evening, everyone. Can anyone hear me? Do you want to just pop it in the chat? Great. Sounds like a success. Well done to Gary for taking us through the 430. You know, if we had hours and hours, we can show you all the features in it. But rest assured, if you come in for a your competency session and that sort of thing, with a bit of practice, we can take you through any questions you might have and show you in real time in the aircraft, and that will, I'm sure, answer any questions you might have. Yeah, so I'm now coming on the call to take care of the 296 GPS, the GPS map 296, which is a bit more of a cheerful little basic VFR style GPS unit. It can be used as a handheld. People can put them in their boats and even in their cars. It was actually designed for all that kind of thing. It's also manufactured by Garmin, so it has not the same architecture as the 430 that we just went through, but there are some similarities, and so hopefully we can relate get as much kind of transfer of knowledge as possible between what Gary just presented and what I did. Now, there, as Carl said, there isn't a simulator or emulator for the 296. So instead, I put together a PowerPoint with some great help from Ezra the other day while we were, sitting at Lilydale, finding things to do because we can't fly with all you lovely people. So we've been hard at work doing this kind of thing. So yeah, thanks, Carl. He's got the first slide up there, which is great. And it's just an intro slide, but if you have a look here, this will make a bit more sense in a moment. I put, first of all, the first screen there that's just on its own. It says GPS tab. That's the screen that you're going to see. I guess I'd call that the main menu screen. Like I said, we'll go into navigation between these screens in just a moment. And then from there, you'll hit what's called the page mode button. Don't worry, we'll have a graphical representation in a minute. And then essentially, to keep it nice and straightforward, once you pass that first main menu page, you essentially can continue to roll through a cycle of these 5 pages below, just 5. You can go forward by hitting page mode, and you can go backward by hitting the quit button. And if you ever want to jump back to that main menu, which if you're using basic functions, you probably won't need to, but if you hit the menu button twice, you'll get there. Anyway, don't worry, I'll reiterate that in a moment. Before we move on, I'll just give you a really quick verbal overview of what we're going to look at. We'll keep it nice and brief, should only be about 10 minutes, maybe 15. And if you've got any questions, we can get into those at the end. Basically, I'm going to focus on, starting up the 296, some of the things on the intro screen where you'll see the satellites. You can actually see that right now on that alone page that's on the PowerPoint slide at the moment. And look at changing the backlight, which is sounds simple, but is a lot of people have turned these units on and said, hey, the screen's blank. Why can't I see anything? So we'll get into that, how to fix those sort of things. Then getting into the main menu, just to show that a little bit, and then moving forward to the cycle of the pages, and there's 5 of them. You can see them there: map page, terrain page, panel page, active route page, and position data page. And then we'll get into more detail, the active route page, which, as you can see, just looking at it there, is quite analogous to the 430 flight plan page. It's more or less the same thing. Then we'll look at functions like the nearest button. It has its own nearest button, much the same way as the 430 had a nearest chapter or group. And it also has a direct to button. Again, same sort of idea. They both toggle on and off rather than being in that cycle of 5 pages. And yeah, that's pretty much about it for the 296. So going on to the first page here. All right, so if you find that your unit is not on, actually I should start by saying, generally speaking with these units, they are plugged in, and so they have a continuous trickle charge from the aircraft's power system. So when you turn the master on, you'll tend to find, if you see that top right screen, they'll tend to turn on to that top right screen, which is just a disclaimer saying, basically be careful. All the stuff that we emphasized last week, don't blindly follow GPS. Make sure you're using it as a supplement to good navigation.
Just a quick question about that. That's the screen where the date of the GPS database appears as well, isn't it?
That's true, yes. And on these 296s, you're going to find that database is a long, long way out of date. Don't panic. The reason why, with the 430, it's much more important that Carl does his job of updating the database, because they're used in a more crucial role, used in actual IMC and at night, and used for instrument procedures. With the one thing we want to emphasize with the 296, I mean, this course is really is tailored to visual pilots. We want you to always be backing up your navigation with visual observations of the ground dead reckoning and using your maps and that sort of thing always. And so we're trying to strongly encourage that. And as we also pointed out last week, the 296s, they're not the type of GPS that you that you can, according to the regs, use as a sole reference for navigation. And so having an up-to-date database is a bit of a hassle that it's actually quite difficult to, would be quite difficult to maintain on these units, and we just don't bother doing them. Generally speaking, they have your common airports in there, and those haven't really changed or moved in many, many years. But just watch out, because people do put in user waypoints, and be very, very careful of using user waypoints. I think we covered that last week. Yeah, make sure you cross-check that indeed it's GPS is giving you directions to the place you intended. So yeah, as Carl said, on that initial page, you'll see database dates and a few things, but basically you don't need to pay too much attention to it on this unit. And then I've highlighted there the enter button. Now, just going down to the bottom left slide, yeah, if the unit is powered down, hold that big red, well, it's little really, but that red power button, and hold it down and it should turn on. So it's possible that the unit's just not turned on for whatever reason. And staying on that bottom left slide, you can see there that you can barely read what's on the screen. And so sometimes the unit powers up into that kind of really dim mode, and it's really hard to see anything on the screen. So rather than feeling around trying to change the brightness, if you just hit the power button a couple of times, not hold, but just tap it, you should be able to fix that, and it should come bright like the other 3 pages on this slide. Now, the other function of the power button is to bring up, if we just go to the bottom right screen, that power button brings up a little kind of pop-up window there. You can see it's got, I think that's battery time left, but anyway, it's got a graphical representation of the battery charge, which is that kind of blue bar. And you can see on the left, it's got, yeah, I think left is brightness. Yep, good, perfect. Thanks, Carl. And along the bottom is volume, because this unit makes beeps and stuff when you tap buttons. So you can adjust those two by using the rocker. I've highlighted that with a yellow circle there. And yeah, that rocker, they call it a rocker, but the arrows basically are used to navigate around. And on this little toggle window, you can set the brightness and set the volume. Now, if you wanted to get rid of that little box, you could just hit quit, which is just there, just to the top left of that rocker, little quit button. I believe there's probably a few ways to do it. You could probably hit menu as well. Should be pretty easy. You know what? I've got the unit right next to me, so I'm just going to confirm these things and muck around with it. That's a little beep that it made, and play along myself, seeing as you guys can't. So yeah, does it? I don't think there'd be any questions with those initial screens. Yeah. If anyone has any questions, just put them up in the chat there. All right, Carl, if you could move along to the next slide, please. Cool. Quit. Yeah, the quit button does get rid of that. Okay. Yeah, so this slide is basically showing the main menu, and there's a little, there are tabs down the left there, which you can use the rocker to basically, if you go up and down, I'm doing it myself now, that'll highlight those tabs on the edge: GPS, flights, route, points, and track. Probably the only relevant ones, flights, that's because it actually logs your flights for you. I've never used it in that mode. Route, so if people have made active routes, I think you can go and select them there. Just be careful though, because yeah, it may not have the info that you want. Yeah, sorry, can you just go back a page, Carl? Just for a sec. Cool, I just want to make sure there wasn't anything there. Yeah, cool, so that's the menu page. And basically, yeah, it's got your satellites and that sort of thing. Pretty straightforward, nothing too important on that page for us. Now, yeah, like I said, at any point, if you hit the menu page twice in a row, it'll take you back to that if you really want to go back there. But probably what you want to do is go forward into that cycle of 5 pages that are going to be useful to us. And to do that, we hit the page mode button to progress into those. So yeah, we'll go to the next slide. Thanks. Awesome. All right. So the first page that should come up is the map page. And this is probably the one you're going to use the most with this unit. So we've got the in and out buttons. That's basically the same as the 430's range buttons. It's going to change the scale. Pretty straightforward there. By the way, in the bottom right-hand corner of the map, you can see 5 nautical miles written there. So it's giving you a scale indication, which is handy. Yeah, you've got on the map there, you've got airspace boundaries, some basic topographical information. There's the Yarra River and that sort of thing. And also there's a magenta line there, the magic magenta line we call it, which is the route. Again, you know, it was magenta on the 430 as well, just a different color. And that's showing you basically an active route or course that you have selected for guidance. Now down the right-hand side there, this is a really handy setup. I really like it in this setup, which is where you have just 5 rather large data boxes down the right-hand side showing you ground speed, distance to the next waypoint, ETE to the next waypoint. So if anyone's unsure what ETE, estimated time en route. So that should be generally showing you minutes and seconds until you get there. Or if you are an hour away, it might be hours and minutes. That's displayed the exact same way on the Garmin 430. Then we've got track, and I just want to define what track is, what it's referring to here. On the 430, that would be, shorthand would be TRK, and it was on the default nav page. And here on the 296, it actually says the full word track. And you can see that our track is 348. And just to make this really clear, because this is a fundamental concept when using GPSs, is just remember that the GPS is measuring your position relative to the Earth, just like we went through in the last meeting last week. So the GPS does not actually know what heading you're flying. Just remember, it's not heading. It doesn't know. It doesn't know what your heading is from the heading indicator or the compass. It's got no idea. All it's doing is comparing your last known position to your next and saying, well, if I compare those 2 positions in terms of magnetic track, this was the direction you were going over the points on the ground. So it's showing you your track, or textbooks would call it your track made good. So that is the track that your aircraft is doing over the ground. I just want to emphasize that, because track and heading can be different. And theoretically, the difference between track and heading would be your wind drift correction, just to make things really clear. Cool. So hopefully everyone understands what track is. If you've done navigation, yeah, that should make sense to you. Now, we've also got their bearing. Now, notice that the aircraft's track is 348. And in this case, our active route's taking us to Lilydale. But you can see the aircraft is just bearing, sorry, I shouldn't say bearing. It's pointing slightly to the right of Lilydale, yeah? So it's tracking 348, which you can see would probably just skim us past the edge of Coldstream and not take us directly to Lilydale. Now, what they're referring to as bearing here, what's the definition of bearing in this context? Bearing is the magnetic track, or if you drew a line from your current position to the destination waypoint, bearing is the magnetic track to the waypoint. So if you want to track to Lilydale in this case, you want to make a slight and slow turn to the left. And as you do so, your track would start to decrease. The numbers would decrease because you're turning left. And if you can get your track and bearing to be more or less the same number, then you're going to arrive at your destination. Now with the 430, the way Gary had it set up there, it was showing bearing, just shortened to BRG, I think. However, the 430 architecture tends to have what's called direct track, or DTK, which is the line between the two waypoints you've got selected. And so basically, if you make your track the same as desired track, or DTK, on the 430, then you will track parallel to that line that you've set. That's a little bit different to what's displayed here. It's all the same kind of concept, but a little bit different way of doing it. And on the GPS map, it tends to instead refer to the bearing of the station. So that's the magnetic bearing from wherever you are right now to the station. So for instance, to give you an example you guys would all understand, you're out there in the training area and you're over near Steele's Hill, or maybe you're just north of Steele's Hill, and you're ready to give your inbound call. You'll say, you know, I'm 6 miles east at 3,000 feet inbound, Lilydale. So what you're really saying is your bearing from the airport would be east 090, but if you were using the GPS would say, in bearing there, it would say, well, Lilydale is bearing 270. It's bearing west from your current position, thereby telling you what direction to fly to get there. Hopefully that analogy makes sense. Anyway, okay, so if you want to change that layout, you can feel free to muck around with it and change it if you like. You can hit the menu button, and that will bring up a little sub-menu that has a few options, and you should be able to use the rocker and just find page layout, and then you can select. It's all quite graphical and easy to use. So anyway, I better move on from that. Okay, good. So yeah, as I said, just to reiterate, to move through these pages, just keep hitting page mode. And if you've gone too far, just hit the quit button and you'll go back a page. And they just keep cycling around this five-page cycle. So yeah, the last slide was map page. You're probably going to be using that a lot. This next page is the terrain page. Gary showed us the terrain page in the Garmin 430. It works much the same way, and you can see it even gives you a representation of the scale there. Pretty straightforward. And once again, it's kind of useful because it's got your magenta line there of your active route. You can see that active route going towards Lilydale, and it's got distance track, and it's showing you GPS altitude because altitude's quite relevant to terrain there. Anyway, we'll move on by hitting page mode. Cool. The next page is panel page. Now this one kind of looks like almost like a 6-pack of instruments on your panel. But I just want to remind everyone that this is not showing you what your instruments on the plane show you. There may be some similarities, but remember this is a GPS unit. It just knows where your position is, your 3D position is relative to the Earth. And so it can determine when referencing speed, it's referencing ground speed. And when referencing altitude, it's referencing GPS altitude. And don't get me wrong, GPS altitude is most likely to be very accurate. But of course, we don't know. It's going to be accurate 99 or more % of the time. But yeah, we don't have a RAIM function. We don't know exactly how accurate this unit is going to be at any given time. And in any case, we don't generally use GPS altitude. But hey, if you really, really had to, and if somehow you didn't have any instruments available, you could get by and fly the plane on this screen, which is kind of nice to know. Got a little turn coordinator there. And right in the center, in more advanced avionics, we'd refer to this as a HSI, which is just like a horizontal situation indicator. It's basically like a DG with various things superimposed on it. And you've got there a course deviation indicator. So much like the way the 430 works on default nav page, if you wanted to fly it like that, you've got a course deviation indicator right here. You can see the CDI bar is out to the left there. So it's telling us that if we want to get on that desired course, which by the way, it was set when these pictures were taken, it was set for Tooradin to Lilydale. It's telling us that we are to the right of that track. And so if we want to get back on that track, we need to fly to the left. All right, we'll hit page mode again and continue to the next page. Cool. Now, I actually did this slightly out of order. The next page is normally flight plan, but I wanted to just go onto position data because we'll get onto flight plan in a minute. But anyway, if you keep going through, you'll find this position data page. It's fairly self-explanatory, I guess. There's a lot of information there. Up to you whether you want to use it. Like I said, you can configure the map page to get any of that information that you want on it anyway. So you're probably not going to use this one too often, but it's there if you want to use it and have a play around with it. All right, we'll hit page mode one more time and navigate to the active route. So I promise we'll just go for another 5 minutes or so, so not too much longer. So active route is probably what's going to take the most practice to get used to with this unit. So I recommend using it while you're sitting on the ground there. And as long as you're not using the unit for too long, we don't mind if you start the unit up with the master off, because it's got a pretty good battery in it. So you could start to load an active route before you start it up if you wanted to. So right here, we've got an active route already dialed in, Tooradin to Lilydale. So basically, using the rocker, which are those arrow pages, you can move the cursor around. So the cursor will be basically a yellow highlight, and you would move that rocker down until it's on the dashed line there, and that would be highlighted in yellow. And then you'd hit enter in order to enter data. A pop-up screen comes up, and Carl, if you could just quickly go to the next page. Perfect. Yep. So that pops up, or yeah, it's something very similar to that anyway. And you can see go to is highlighted there, but again, you can use the rocker to move that around. And so there's a couple ways you can do this. You could highlight, so I've written there, you can highlight recent. So they're just like little tabs. You go up to recent and just hit enter on that. That'll bring up a bunch of recent airports. And that's usually the quickest way to put in a flight plan, because chances are, particularly if you're doing the standard Lilydale navs, some of the more common airports like Leongatha and Latrobe Valley and Tooradin and so on and so forth are in the recent tab there, Moorabbin, Essendon. So that's kind of handy. So you can just go straight to them, highlight them, hit enter, and then it'll kind of say, are you sure, by going to what you see right here, go to, and you say yes, enter again, and that'll enter the waypoint into the active route. By the way, if you hit direct to, it's much the same. This will come up and you select something and just go to. It's just a matter of hitting enter. Good. So if you could go, yeah, sorry. And then the other way you could do it, let's say it's not in the recent there, in the recent list, as displayed there, just to highlight YMAV, Avalon. So the highlighter will highlight the whole thing. Then if you hit enter, much like the 430, it will then only be highlighting the Y. And you can use the rocker to just carefully move across. So you want Y, move across to the M. If it's Latrobe Valley, going up and down to find L. And then when you're happy with that, go across one. So basically just using the arrows to move the cursor across, and up and down to change the character. And then when you're done, just hit enter, and it will again jump you straight over to the go to function and enter again. And that should work. So if you could go back one page for me, Carl. Thanks. Awesome. So, okay, so you put in your waypoints. Now, something that can happen, and this is also very relevant to the 430 as well, is you may not have the active route the way you want it. And what I mean by that is you can see this yellow arrow that kind of goes down and across on the left-hand side of the margin there. So what it's saying is the active route selected is the Tooradin to Lilydale route. And if that's not what you want, you can actually, yeah, okay, it's a bit different. Yeah, on the 430, you'd hit the menu button, and the first option, as long as the cursor is on a waypoint on your flight plan on the 430, when you hit menu, the first option is activate leg. So that's the 430. Activate leg is the option that you're after, and it will take you to that leg. It'll draw a line from the previous waypoint to that waypoint that you selected, and that will be your active leg. Now, on the 296, slightly different architecture, it's a bit simpler. Basically, let's say it's not set the way you want to be. Say, hey, I want to go to Lilydale. It's just go to highlight Lilydale using the rocker, and then hit enter and enter again. So it'll be enter, and then it'll say go to and enter again, and that's it exactly there, and that'll work. So it's a little bit more basic. It doesn't have an activate route option. It's really just a go to option. And it'll draw the line in much the same way that direct to would. It'll draw a line from where you currently are. That's my understanding anyway. That's But yeah, in any case, it'll get you by. It'll work. All right, we'll go through one more page. Let's see what else I had there. Yeah, so there's an example of an active route, and yeah, whoops, and that might have been more relevant for before. But we've put in, yeah, Lilydale to Tooradin, Tooradin to Latrobe Valley, Latrobe Valley to Lilydale. And so, yeah, if you were about to leave, you could just move that cursor. There's the yellow there. Use the rock and move it up to Tooradin, hit enter and enter again, and away you go. Yeah, sorry, just go back one more page, and just to reiterate, you can see there's no yellow arrow there. So I'm just highlighting that in this current state, there is no active route selected. So the pilot needs to do what I basically just said: highlight one, hit enter, and enter again. Thanks, Carl. And we'll just go one more forward. Okay, yeah. So when you're in the flight plan page, you could hit the menu button. You can see it there, just kind of at the lower end of the unit menu, and that'll bring up this little pop-up menu here. And you've got a few options here. May or may not use them. Just be careful. Don't hit deactivate unless you actually want to wipe out the flight plan, because that's what it does. So deactivate actually really means delete flight plan. So just be wary of that. And then there's other options there, which I probably would encourage you to get too carried away with, like edit on map. Maybe not the best idea. Yeah, you can add waypoint. So that's an option. And yeah, so if you've got a waypoint highlighted, you could move it. I probably wouldn't recommend that. Invert, so that could be useful. What if you want to fly the same plan but fly it in reverse? Just hit invert, it will flip the thing upside down. There's a few other options for you to dig into there. Cool, and just one more slide, please. Cool, nearest page. Yeah, so this one you might already be familiar with. I like to bring this one up even during RPL and RPC training because it's quite useful. Right down there in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see NRST find, which is short for nearest find. So that's exactly the same as the nearest function on the 430. Just go and press that button, and list of the nearest airports come up. Airport is usually number one, but again, you can go across the tabs and find other things if you really want to. And you can see this one's set up for bearing with an arrow. Sometimes the bearing is expressed as degrees magnetic to the station, but the arrow is kind of handy. It's giving you an arrow relative to north being up, basically. It's giving you a distance to the station as well, and they're highlighted in order of whatever is the nearest. Now, if you move the cursor down, if you want to make this thing run quite efficiently, you can move the cursor down. Let's say you want to go direct to Moorabbin. Move the cursor down to Moorabbin, highlight it, hit enter and enter again, and away you go. You're going to go there. And another way to do that would be to highlight it and hit direct to. And if we can just go to one more page, just talking about the direct to page. So yeah, so there's a little direct to button, just like on the 430. That'll bring up the direct to page, and so you can just go straight to that function right there if you want to. But it's much the same. Pretty much every time you select a waypoint and you see this screen, if you go to, that's what it's going to do. It's going to draw a line to that place and set it as your active waypoint. Okay, and I think that might be everything. Just one more page. Yeah, and that concludes the 296 tutorial. Just wondering if anyone had any questions about the functions there or anything they want to learn about it.
I haven't had any questions through the chat menu, Matt. Thank you very much. Just something I'd like to add to it too, from an operational perspective. When you shut the GPS down at the end of the flight, it has a little battery warning that says press any on battery power, press any button to continue. At that point, don't press any buttons to continue, because what the GPS will then do is it'll just stay running forever until the battery goes flat. So when you do finish your flight and you power everything down, the GPS will continue to run for a little while. Just let it shut down. If you go pushing buttons on it, unfortunately, sometimes it will then get forgotten about and we end up with flat batteries in the GPS, which is just a minor pain. So just be a little bit careful with that.
Very good. Cool. Yeah, that concludes our kind of 2-week session. Now there's, Carl, is the exam available on Moodle at the moment?
It is. We haven't enabled it yet because we've still got to write a couple of extra questions to try and trick everyone and fool them all. So we've got a couple more questions to do on that. I expect to have that finished by midday tomorrow. Those of you that don't yet have a Moodle account, please contact me via email. I put my email address up in the chat channel there so that I can set you up with a Moodle account. In addition, all of these resources, the simulator, the links to the documentation, they're all in the Moodle under the GPS course. So all that stuff is in there as well. So yeah, please get in touch with me via email and I'll set it all up for you guys. Big thank you to Matt for putting his time in, and Gary who's had to nick off and go home to look after his kids. But thank you both for presenting this. It's a little bit more housekeeping. At the conclusion of these two talks and having done the quiz and a short assessment at Lilydale, we will be able to issue you with a certificate of competency to use these devices, which is quite a handy thing. And obviously means that your knowledge and how to use the GPSs becomes a lot more valuable to you. So thanks guys very much. If anyone has any last questions now, just turn your microphones on or whack them in the chat. That's all good. Yeah, thanks, Matt.
No worries. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And yeah, if you want to know more, we'll be happy to, when we can meet face to face again, we can answer any questions and show you use of the unit in flight. Really get the full hang of it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Matt. I'm going to shut it all down now. The video for this will be uploaded probably sometime in the next hour or so. It'll be linked to our Facebook page and also our YouTube channel. And also there'll be a link to it from the Moodle. So thanks everyone for coming along. I think we had about 45 tonight, which is really good. We're very pleased with that. So thanks everyone for coming along and being a part of it. And we will see you as soon as we can. Thank you, Matt.
No worries. Thanks, Carl. See you later.